Welcome to episode 37 of Anchored in Education. I'm E. Scott England, and Anchored in Education is the podcast dedicated to all things education. Educators across the world routinely engage in conversations surrounding fundamentals, concepts, and new ideas that improve this great profession. Sometimes we agree, other times we disagree. But at the end of the day, we are all anchored in education. I have shared my story of becoming anchored in education before, but let me sum it up quickly. I always wanted to be an educator, but I struggled initially in school, so I started a family and focused more on just working. Then I entered education in my late 20s. Something I have not shared a lot in the past, though, are the struggles of maintaining a balance between my personal and professional lives. Many administrators know what I'm talking about. Work-life balance is a frequently discussed topic. But I think we often fail to remind teachers that they too should maintain a work-life balance. Teaching is stressful because we want to spend every waking minute making each lesson and experience engaging, impactful, and memorable. Now, as a teacher, I could have literally worked on something all the time to improve the experience for my young students, or improve myself as an educator, or make tweaks to my classroom. I have been a better administrator because I had the opportunity to learn about work-life imbalance much earlier. I have even taken steps to improve my health because, I'll say it again, our profession is stressful, which is why I believe it is a good time to talk about educator self-care. We're almost through a semester, and many of us are at the point where we can become engrossed in what we're doing professionally and neglect what is important personally. Now, to help me out today, I've invited Dr. John Bartelt, Superintendent of Bloomingdale School District 13 in Roselle, Illinois. To be perfectly honest, John is such a well-rounded educator that he could join me on almost any episode of Anchored in Education and teach us something. But John comes to us with 30 years of being anchored in education, so he knows a few things about work-life balance. I believe John shares my sentiment in that my goal is to make sure we all remain anchored in this great profession. John, welcome to Anchored in Education.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks for having me today.
I'm very excited to have you today, John, because you're going to be talking about a topic that I think is top priority for educators across all levels here. And but before we get into that and before we get started, I believe we would like to find out a little bit more about you and how you became anchored in education.
Well, much like everybody else, we all have our figures in our past that have made a difference, and there were some teachers that believed in me. And through my church group in high school, I found that leadership was something that I went toward, and I said that I wanted to make a difference to students, and I thought that the best way to help students learn and achieve was through becoming a teacher. When I studied that, I didn't realize that the subjects that I picked paralleled my maternal grandfather's career, who was a teacher in Galva, Illinois, out in Henry County. And he coached and taught. And the funny thing is that in my first role, which was in a rural community in Kankakee, Iroquois counties, I was also a social studies teacher. I was also a coach, and a PE teacher, which are the things that he was doing for his at the beginning of his career. So I had no idea that my career would parallel his in many respects. But I also find that as I've grown in this profession and had opportunities presented to me, there are inspirations everywhere, and I'm inspired by folks like yourself who are putting messages out for educators to learn through your podcast. The others of our colleagues who are international and are spreading the word of what is important for children's choice and voice, speaking particularly of doctors Lubafeld and Poliak in China this last week, as well as the work done by Dr. Ken Wallace in Maine Township High Schools up here in the northern suburbs of Chicago, and what he does to make sure that students are career ready, along with Dr. Dave Schuler at District 214. So, I mean, I'm inspired by a lot of my current colleagues. I'm inspired by many of my classroom teachers that I get to observe from time to time as they are creating and enriching environments for students to learn and grow. So I feel like those are the inspirations that have kind of built me to this point. Um, I've had uh, I'm entering my 19th year as a school superintendent. I only had the opportunity to formally teach by title's sake only for 4 years, but received plenty of opportunities and encouragement to lead school districts from St. Anne, Illinois, to where I'm at now in Bloomingdale.
Well, for one, quite the history, and that parallel is just really interesting that you had with your family there. A lot of shout outs to many awesome educators throughout, and I think the one which I wouldn't expect you to give a shout out to, but I'll go ahead and do so, would be yourself. Uh, because obviously you are an inspiration to many for a lot of the great things that you're doing in Bloomingdale. But above all, the one thing I've picked up on a lot is maintaining that work-life balance and stressing how important it is to others, because that's what we're talking about today. We're talking about self-care, and as I said, we hear it. We call it a bunch of different things. So work-life balance, we hear about it, or self-care. But what is the best way to describe self-care, and why is it important that we're taking the time to talk about this topic today?
Thanks for bringing this up, and this is a topic I'm very passionate about. Self care to me, Scott, is uh, the ability to recognize, to step a little bit outside yourself and look at yourself and find what you're doing and where you need to improve, because ultimately we're all built with imperfections, and those imperfections, we don't want to strive to be perfect, because that's the sure pet the crazy. But what I will say is that the there's things that we can do better, and we like to think of ourselves as being best able to serve those who are around us. If we don't take care of ourselves, there's no way we're going to be able to take care of others around us. I use the example that you will find, and I know there are several educators that have used this example. Uh, when you're on an airplane, you are directed when uh, if the air masks should drop in a tense situation, you are directed to put the air mask on yourself first. The reason for this is because if there are others that are depending on you to take care of them, you have to have that oxygen first so that you can think rationally and assist them in that process. If you don't do it, the situation could rapidly develop that you lose consciousness and then, therefore, are rendered helpless to help those who you care for that may be around you. In that same way, I think that you have to take a look at yourself and look at the things that you're doing. And I think that in any situation, whether you're a teacher in a classroom, or you're an administrator in a school district, or you're a parent in your own household, um, we look at the word caretaker, and sometimes we think of that as status quo, or maintaining a status quo. And I disagree with that definition, although I realize that is part of the definition.
Uh-huh.
I tend to think of caretaker as those who take care of, those who are in charge of, or are assuming the responsibility of the care for others. And in that way, we have a responsibility in that care for others to also care for ourselves first. And it sounds rather egotistical that you have to address yourself first, but I truly believe that you maintain a much more positive perspective if you are feeling good if you are well rested, if you are uh, taking activity and making it a part of your daily routine. An activity could be exercise, activity could be a walk, activity could be doing a crossword puzzle and maintaining high level brain function. Activity can be what you design it to be and whatever brings you satisfaction. And so in that way, I look at self care, which will lead to a better work life balance, because as you examine yourself, Scott, you are looking at how much time am I spending doing this versus how much time am I spending with the people that matter to me most, and how much time am I spending in my spiritual self. And I think you have to find those balances for yourself that work, because there are going to be demands made of you in each of those categories from time to time throughout our lives. And you have to make adjustments. There are going to be times where you have to spend more time in your work life, and there'll be times where you have to spend more time with your family life and your personal life. And there may be times where you have to spend more time in your with your spiritual life. Those are key elements to maintaining what I call a very healthy sense of self. And doing that, I think, and being acknowledging them and investing time in them helps you uh, be more well-rounded, well-rested, more positive, and better able to lead your classroom, or lead your school district, or lead your building, or lead your board members, whomever it is that you are caretaking at that moment.
Absolutely. And I love the analogy on the oxygen, because that really that kind of sets the foundation for what we're talking about. And when we talk about that, the different balances, whether it's work or personal or spiritual, whenever we use the word balance, we're not talking about equal parts. So, we're not looking, I spent this much time at work, so I must spend this much time, here, or this much time there. It's simply recognizing, okay, I've put in this much time towards work, and so now it's time that I focus on, X for so long. And you're right. Activities do not have to be complicated, and they vary by each person as well. And you bring all of this to us because you and I have, to some extent, have gone through some pretty intensive personal and professional development in which self care was a major emphasis. So, what have you put into practice to make sure that you're taking care of yourself?
Well, it started with acknowledging that there was a problem uh, with my balance. You can easily lose yourself in any of those areas at the expense of the other two. I like to think of it as a three-legged stool. If you want to sit and rest comfortably, you better be attending to those three legs. The in my case, what I have found that works for me is uh, taking a. I like to take walks with my wife, and my knees are not good for running, so I will not pretend to run.
Okay.
Only when chased by like large angry animals will I ever run. But the long walks with my wife allow me to reflect. They allow me uh, to recharge, and I think that element helps me. Making sure I get a good night's sleep. I'm. There was a time where I was hyperly active in social media. I'm still very active, but not as active as I used to be, and I think that it affected my sleep patterns. And I think I needed to address the fact that in order for me to be the best John Bartelt that I could be, I needed to have a certain amount of rest every night. I needed to go see my doctor and make sure that I'm attending to my issues. And if I don't attend to my issues, uh, I could be jeopardizing life outside of work. or even work itself, because I would be missing time due to health-related issues. And while I don't have anything that I would call serious health-related issues, the early identification of high blood pressure and other things with my lab results allows me to maintain a sense of balance health-wise that I wouldn't have known had I not taken annual doctor visits earlier in my career. And I would advise all educators, take the time for an annual physical. Uh, it's more for your information than anything else. But if you find something, or something is found in that process, you're better able to deal with it at an earlier stage than you wait for it to affect you later in life. And so that's a key piece to this. And that was a key piece to me as well. Um, Other things that I've done, and the thing I've most recently done, because I'm continuously learning of ways that I can take care of myself uh, as a human, as well as taking care of myself as a school leader, and as a father, and as a husband, and a grandfather. The ways that I do this is I've personally have employed an executive coach for the first time. And,
Okay.
and, and we've talked about executive coaches, and that is it's a uh, popular practice in education right now, but not so much for school leaders. And I've had instructional coaches in my district for many years, but I learned in a session that I sponsor in Bloomingdale called Coaching for Leaders, which is led by Nancy Blair and Sandy Brown, who's a master coach. I learned the importance of having somebody there who can give you that third party view of what you're doing, and can facilitate conversations that allow you to reflect upon things in a different perspective. And so I learned from that maybe I would try this year to have my own coach who could help me. And again, 30 years in education, you think you know a lot of things that are going on, and a lot about the field. But I know that the reality is that things are changing dynamically all the time. And if I am to be best able to serve the needs of my community and my family, then I need somebody who can look at what I'm doing and give me that feedback. And I have to also be ready to accept that feedback so that I can do something about it to make myself an even better version of myself. We update our apps on our phone. Why don't we update ourselves from time to time? And I look at this as a way to update myself to John Bartelt 2 or 3.0 or whatever it might be. But for me, it's an opportunity to uh, hear and listen and share, because relationships are always going to be important, no matter where we are and what we do, whether you're serving children directly in a classroom or otherwise. You have to have those. You have to things in relationships will make the difference in the way you view your field, yourself, and your life. And having somebody who can look at me and share and ask questions that will probe into the reasons why I would do something helps me helps me realize whether or not I'm going down a path that may be ill-advised at a time, or whether or not I'm pursuing something that's going to have a, a good potential for some really good results.
That's a good point. We spend a lot of time updating things in our life that are important, but really to our overall health and well-being, uh, really have no bearing. And you mentioned apps, and I think of how many times, I spend looking at upgrading either apps or phones or iPad, whatever it may be. Why wouldn't we want to to update ourselves? Because I sure don't want, whatever year I'm in education right now, I don't want to be the same version that I was at year 1.0. So
Hmm.
good point. And I would be remiss not to have to recognize that shout out to Nancy Blair and Sandy Brown. And it's difficult if you have never had the opportunity to have a conversation with either of those two wonderful leaders to understand why it's so important that we're giving them shout outs. But they are amazing people. And I believe in the first part of 2020, Sandy Brown will be joining me on Anchored in Education. And so,
And that'll be a remarkable show. You don't want to miss that,
uh,
folks who are listening to
I
this.
think. Well, I appreciate that, but you're absolutely right. I could listen to Sandy every day. Sometimes I wish I could listen to Sandy every day. Now, uh, I'm sure we have teachers and other educators right now thinking, well, here's a couple of superintendents talking about self care, but how does that apply to me? I think though it would be hard to argue against the fact that no matter our role in education, it has the potential, and you kind of alluded to this earlier, to be all consuming if we are not careful. In fact, you mentioned that perfect is the sure path to crazy, and that's exactly what we're talking about right here. So, what advice can you give newer teachers who are becoming overwhelmed with our work?
Well, as we've all heard in our lives, whether we were in our first years or talking to those who are in their first years, it's always that hardest year in your field because you are learning everything for the first time. You're in a new school building with new people. You want to impress everybody. You want to be successful. You want to make a difference. You want to be the differences, and that's all going to happen. But you are also threatening your care for yourself because you're going to be exposed to so many different things that could negatively impact you, whether it's the snotty-nosed kid in your classroom who could get you sick, or it could be the demands of getting the grading done on time and uploaded into your database or just into your grade book. The things that you have to do, the things that I would advise would be you have to, first of all, be able to take a step back from time to time. And you'll know when those times are because you'll be feeling stress and it'll be almost palpable. You can almost feel it in like your throat that you're all plugged up and tense. That's when you have to take a step back and do something for yourself. And whatever that may be, such as reading a book, taking a walk, exercise, talking to a friend that you haven't talked to in a long time. These are ways that you recharge yourself because it's important that you be mindful to the signals that your body is telling you. And as a new teacher, there are going to be enough challenges, and those challenges are never really going to go away. It always seems like, after your first year, supposedly everything's supposed to be gravy after that. That's not necessarily the truth. The challenges just take on different forms and different situations that develop naturally in your practice. I think it's so important that you take some time just to make sure that you're okay. Connect with the people in your life that matter and do it frequently. I'm not talking about putting an agenda together and say, okay, at such and such a time, I'm to call mom and dad. No, that's not as relevant in the situation because at that point you're essentially uh, executive functioning your way through self care. I think sometimes it just means taking a step back, taking a deep breath, letting it out slow, and understanding that what's happening right now is only happening right now. It's temporary. What you are ongoing. You're going to persevere. You're going to triumph over the adversity that you're facing. You're going to make it through the stressful event that you're feeling in that moment. But if you don't take time for that, it could have physiological and emotional impact on you. And that's what we read about currently as a national problem, which is teacher burnout in their early years. And in order to avoid that, it means that sometimes we have to ask for help. And I don't think that that's wrong either. Uh, Everybody, including your building administrators, wants you to succeed. They wouldn't bring you into the building as a new teacher if they didn't believe in your capacity to succeed.
That's right.
But if that success is going to happen, everybody asks for help. Even I in my role ask for help from time to time because I know that I don't know everything. And with that knowledge, it means that I'm able then to best go to people who I may have that had that experience, and I can learn from them how they handled situations and try to see how does that work for me in what I'm trying to deal with right now. It's so important for new teachers to just make sure you're taking time for you so that you can be the best you can be for your children, for your families, and for your community.
Sure. And, one thing that I think is important to communicate to beginning teachers, first year, even a couple years in, is that, you kind of, you mentioned this, that the, the work may not be done, but it will be there when you return. And so, we can continue to put hours after hours, but there's some days where it's time to go home. It may be 3:30, it may be 4 o'clock, and you're used to working till 5 or 5:30 or 6, but some days you just need to leave. And the most important part is don't feel guilty about whenever you have to step away to take time to recharge your own batteries, because you're really doing it not just for yourself but all of those people that you had mentioned, the students, the community, and everyone else. And I think that's something that why we get caught in this, because we feel guilty for taking time.
Yes, and I think you made a great point, Scott. That the deadlines are always going to be there. The grading, the paperwork, the planning, the collaboration. Those are all stressful things that are very valid in a teacher's experience. But if you need to set some time to push that aside so that you can be the best you can be, and that stuff will wait until you're ready to pick it up again. But you need to be mindful of yourself and the limitations that you have as a person so that you can take that time for the healing of your person so that you can be the best educator that you can be.
All right. So, moving on, you mentioned you're on Twitter, and you said maybe not as much, but you're still there and still enjoy following you, and you're very active with the Illinois Educator Chat.
Hmm.
That we see you there. So I'm going to make sure to have a link so people can go to my website and then they can click on it and follow you. I think that's important. But for those who already follow you, they may notice that you tweet from time to time to at Calm. And
Yes,
so at Calm is the number one app for sleep, relaxation, and meditation. So I guess, do you have the app downloaded? And if so, can you tell us more about it?
absolutely. I have the app. What I use the app for, the Calm app allows me in a 10-minute span of time on a daily basis to focus only on my breath. And this is a practice that I first learned about with Sandy Brown, who you'll be talking to soon. She led coaching for leaders, all the participants in that program through a meditation each session. And that meditation was to be in tune with and in touch with your body and how it's feeling. But more importantly, the focus is on the breath as it enters and exits your body, and so that you can put aside the stressful elements. And while it seems very simple in my description, I'm still working on it because my mind is so active and my mind is constantly trying to distract me when I'm using the app. That I don't know if I'll ever truly master the art of meditation, but what I can say is that it does benefit me in thinking about my practice and feeling better about myself and taking quiet time to just be focused and have someone else direct me through a process by which I'm doing the simplest of things, yet a very difficult thing at the same time, to try to find an element of relaxation in myself. And you started our conversation today by talking about inspiration. I also use the Calm app for that as well. I like the idea that I can tie in my my day to a key concept or a key piece of inspiration that is offered through the app. And um, the narrator who talks through your meditation has the kind of soft and soothing voice that allows you to relax and really just sink into the directions that are provided. It's a 10-minute span of time. What I will do often is first thing in the morning, put in my earbuds and do a 10-minute calm app meditation. I follow that with a brief scripture reading, and then I feel like I've touched then a little bit of myself, a little bit of my spiritual self, and then I can start organizing and planning my day. And it doesn't necessarily, again, this doesn't necessarily mean um, this is great for all school leaders. This is great for every person that I can share this with. You can find time to do this, and everybody has things that they have to do each day. Um, but I think that what the Calm app allows me to do is it allows me to sit back and really reflect on me and focus on making myself mentally and emotionally strong so that I can make it through another day and do so in a way that is to be a positive difference to those around me.
And if people think about that, I mean, if they just listen closely to how you begin your day, and then they think about what their typical day looks like. And again, it doesn't matter where you're at in education. Your typical day can be it can be a wild one. Depending. And so by taking that power and taking control of how you start the day, really kind of sets you up for whatever may come to you throughout the day.
That's a great point, Scott. That's a great point.
All right. So, John, sometimes we can become consumed without even realizing it. And this one here is for the perceptive leader out there. What can we do to help out fellow educators who are appearing unbalanced in the personal and professional settings?
I think that you start by making yourself available to listen. In Bloomingdale, what I try to do each month is I go to each. I have three buildings in my district, and we're a pre-K to 8 school district. And I'll take one morning a month where I bring in a box of coffee and some treats, and I sit and I listen. And I listen to the staff as a whole, but I try to make myself available to individual staff members if they need to talk to me. And I think sometimes it's also perception, because what you need to be careful of in this situation is you recognize the physical signs of exhaustion and tiredness, and you talk about that with them by asking little questions such as, how are you feeling? Is everything okay? Um, in a smaller school district, there are advantages because everybody wants to take care of each other. The spirit of that small community is a good one when people are caring for one another. And I think that that's what the goal is that people want people to feel good all the time from top to bottom within your organization. Making yourself available to listen, but then also talking through the challenges and making sure everybody knows. I've taken it one step further by making sure that people don't have to wait for a morning coffee to have that moment with me. I set up through Google Forms a anonymous line of communication, which you can acknowledge yourself in the knowledge in the anonymous line of communication. But really, it's a way for someone if they need to unload something that's bothering them, or if they want to say that this is something that they're observing, or maintain some cultural health in your organization. I'm able to look at that, and if it's a district wide piece, I will share out in a monthly video what is being done about those things. If it's a building based concern, I share it with the building leaders to let them address it first, to empower them to be the best that they can be. But for educators who need that help, who are finding trouble with that balance in their lives, or are not really familiar with self-care, I guess I say I can look at attendance data, I can look at sick leave time away from work, and I'll sit down with those individuals and talk with them about the things that they can do differently without it coming across as I'm lecturing you on how you need to lead your life. I only offer suggestions, and if you want to take me up on them or you want to go deeper into it, you certainly can. And I'll take the time to do that, because everyone in my organization is important to me, and I want to make sure that they understand that their continued success involves making sure that they're well taken care of as well. And that's the kind of organization that I like to lead, and so therefore that's the kind of culture I try to build in the many places that I've been, um, for school districts to this point. But in each place, I've tried to create that environment, whether I was a building leader or a district leader or a classroom leader.
And I love the giving opportunity for others to talk. And what you said, listening is a powerful tool. And I'm going to add just one thing on there, because you focus kind of on the professional side. And so I want to make sure that an important thing educators know is that if you've got a significant other at home, to have regular conversations with them and ask them how it's going, and allow them to say, I think you're focusing too much on work and not enough here, and don't get angry, but be thankful that you have somebody that's comfortable telling you that, because that's how you get back in balance at home with personal side as well.
Exactly. And I think that listening comes with the expectation that you better be ready to receive feedback.
Yes.
And that's why when I talk about long walks with my wife as a way for me to care for myself, that's where I listen to her. And that's where she can guide me toward uh, what needs to be more in my radar than appears to be from time to time. And it's a way to keep myself centered on what the important demands are from my family.
Absolutely. Now, before we go, John, it seems like we have talked about self care and we've covered everyone in the school. We've talked teachers, principals, superintendents, anyone, but it seems like maybe we have left out one group, and I would argue the most important group, and that would be the students. So, is it reasonable to believe that students can become unbalanced with academic, athletics, and their personal life?
I think that's a reasonable expectation, and I think you're spot on with that observation. There are many school districts that are taking the concept of mindfulness and are applying those principles, whether they're doing it through creating. I've heard of everything from creating yoga-like uh, uh, physical education courses or units of instruction to quiet moments of reflection, which uh, although the state requires us to have a silent moment of reflection, it usually doesn't expand into a full mindfulness episode. But I think as we discover students that are increasingly putting pressure, are feeling increased pressure to perform at their best at all times, and they're also competing against situations such as is there going to be food on the table at home, or is there does my ADHD create, is it going to create problems for me in my learning, or am I going to get in trouble today because I can't seem to keep my focus? Or is it the fact that mom and dad are arguing so much at home that I'm having trouble maintaining my academic standing at school? The idea that Abraham Maslow put forth in his hierarchy of needs, we've got to address the basic needs of students first. And I think one of them is having the right mindset coming into school. And I'm not talking about Carol Dweck's research here, although it's important. I think that it's, in this case, it's about focused on are the students clean? Are they well rested? Have they eaten? Are they of good frame of mind because their parents are in a good place and their home is in a is a fine environment for. I mean, I'm not expecting Warden June Cleaver. Pardon me for those of you who may not know who those two are, but I'm not looking at the perfect family situation all the time. Things happen in every family, but ultimately, it's for the majority of the time. Do the children know that they're loved? Do the children know that they're loved when they come to school? Do the children then perform in a way to meet or exceed the expectations of the school? And then, if not, what are we doing about that? And I think there are ways that we can stop and recognize students that are uh, in jeopardy. From time to time, it happens. And I think that the ability of us as the adults with the responsibility in loco parentis with our students is to stop what we're doing academically and look at them as people who have needs that need to be met in a different way, and stop and listen to them and help them through that. That doesn't mean that we have to become a full mental health counselor, but many of us are experiencing that our students are overwhelmed by the demands that are made for them before they even walk in our school door. And I think the best way to do that, the best way to approach this is just by looking and listening and letting them share with you. If you're the trusted adult in the building, let them share out to you. Let them tell you what's going on. If you feel as a professional that this is more than you can handle, then you go get help for that child, because each one of those children that enter our schools are important. There's no non-important child, and they all come with a variety of different experiences before they even hit the door. We better be ready for that. And
Yes.
and I think that it's taking care of self-care is something that we can help them understand, because they look to us as their models. We spend several hours a day with them, across our state and across our country. They look to us, and if we appear to be healthy, positive, happy, they're going to want to emulate those models, or they're going to want to find out why is it that even on the rainiest and stormiest days and the gloomiest of moments and the coldest and the most brutal days, that Dr. Bartelt always seems so darn happy. Well, you know what? It's because I am.
Yeah.
And I think that, I can look around and see that there are people who have less fortunate circumstances than I do, and I'm not one to complain. I also know that people look to me, whether that's in my district or even in my own family, and they expect me to be happy, and they're going to want to follow me if I'm happy and I'm projecting positivity and I'm projecting an attitude that there's nothing that we can't do if we're doing this together. And if that's the case, why can't that work with the teacher in the classroom? Why can't that work with the principal in the building, for their staff and their students? And I know it works for superintendents because I see it all the time. But it ultimately, our students can be inspirations to one another if they just understand that, from time to time we're there to pick them up when they need to be picked up, and recognizing those signs is so important. And uh, and I think that we all have that capacity within ourselves to care for those children in a way that can give them the need or the tools necessary uh, to build themselves up and to build a solid foundation as they become adults themselves.
You make a lot of great points, John, that shows that in education we've really come a long way, but our work is not done when it comes to emphasizing self care from students all the way to superintendents. That we still have work to do, and we still have the message to get out there that we need to be able to take care of ourselves, not feel guilty about it, and because overall it'll benefit the group. John, I just want to thank you so much for joining us on Anchored in Education and taking the time to talk more about this important topic that I feel we are probably going to visit again in the future.
Scott, I appreciate the opportunity, and it's always fun to connect with you. So thank you so much.
I really do appreciate John taking the time to talk to us more on taking care of ourselves. And you can find John on Twitter by searching at John Bartelt. You can also learn more about John by visiting escottengland.com and clicking the Read More link under today's episode. And don't forget to subscribe to Anchored in Education on whatever platform you listen to podcasts on so you can remain in the know. If nothing else, let us remember what John said. Perfect is the sure path to crazy. I know how we are as educators. We strive to work so hard to present the perfect lesson, to connect with all the students, to wow those around us, and the list goes on. And don't get me wrong, there is nothing wrong with that at all. But when we obsess over it, we find that imbalances begin to occur. And I will promise you this, an imbalance will lead to something suffering. It may be your practice, your effectiveness, or your personal life. John has more years than I do, so we can definitely learn from him. But I feel I can lend my expertise to this as well, in that you may be thinking you've got it all figured out, but until you have those conversations with others, you won't know. Take the time to evaluate yourself and ask those questions to others. Remember, though, what John said. Be prepared for the answer to your questions. Take those constructive responses as the first steps to creating a better, stronger you. Like John and his wife, Jennifer and I are frequent walkers. It is an amazing time to have a conversation, not to mention the benefits of our health. Remember, the activity does not have to be complicated. Just find what works for you. A better you creates a better us. Because at the end of the day, we are all anchored in education.